As Crystal Bridges in the Momentary, we recognize our role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonization that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change.
Thank you all for joining us tonight for an evening with Charles Person. This is really exciting for me. I really am happy to welcome you to Crystal Bridges and to Northwest Arkansas, and for us to have an opportunity to learn from a living legend. It's not often that we get to, experience history and engage with it in a way that will allow us to learn some lessons that I think we very much need today. So I'd like to start with introducing Mr. Person, but before I do that, I want to thank the IDEA Committee at Crystal Bridges, as well as the ARC Coalition for all of the work that they have done to support this event. And also thank John Brown University for allowing us to partner with them on this amazing opportunity to share in the life and the lessons that Mr. Person has to share with us. So Charles Person was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and attended Morehouse College. As a freshman, he participated in lunch counter sit-ins in Georgia, for which he received a 16-day jail sentence, including 10 days in solitary confinement. After the Freedom Ride, Charles joined the Marines and served 20 years, including 9 months in Vietnam. Today, Mr. Person lives in Atlanta, where he continues to share his story and encourage society to take a stand for what they believe in. Without further ado, Mr. Person.
Good evening. My wife Joetta and I are happy to be here, and I think you guys are trying to seduce us with these beautiful surroundings. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I've just been enthralled all afternoon learning and looking. So hopefully we can come back when all this stuff, we don't have to wear masks, we can shake hands and hug, and then I'll be happy again.
Yes, we took Mr. Person on a tour of the museum, and he's also walking around the grounds and really, really took a lot of pictures and had a lot to say. So please, you're always welcome back. Just let me know so we can make sure you don't get lost somewhere. Like we can take you through again. Um, but I want to start off. Can you talk to us about what motivated you to get involved in the civil rights movement? So kind of take us back a little bit, and then I want us to go forward to understand what are some lessons that we can learn today.
Well, I tried to be a good student when I was a child, and I did the things that my parents asked me to do. So, the semester before school ends, you send in your application to various colleges. Well, I wanted to be a nuclear engineer or a nuclear physicist, and I wanted to go to MIT. Well, I was accepted at MIT, but the tuition at MIT was $2,000 a year in 1960. Morehouse, Georgia Tech had just gotten its reactor. They had just come online. I had visited the Oak Ridge National Laboratories in Tennessee, so after I saw my first reactor, it was love at first sight. So I said, well, I'll go to Georgia Tech because the tuition there was only $375 a semester. But they refused me. But they had a unique way of saying no to black kids. They didn't restrict you because of academics. What they did is in your application, there were 3 blue sheets. 2 of the sheets had to be recommendations from members of the alumni, and the third was you had to be certified by the court in the county courthouse that you were a bona fide resident. Well, getting to be certified was one thing, but getting 2 white kids to recommend me in 1960 was an impossibility. So, like most teenagers, I was sitting around and I'm moping and complaining. And my grandfather got tired of hearing me saying, he said, sit there and moan and groan about it, or you're going to do something about it. So when I got to Morehouse College, I was given an opportunity to do something about it. And that was how I first got involved. My timing was perfect because when I got to Morehouse, the sit-ins in North Carolina had started the year before, so it was just the timing was right. But because I was a freshman, initially they would not allow us to participate. So about the time the first semester was about half over, they decided that the freshmen get involved, and we realized we had a force to reckon with because we had a march in downtown Atlanta with 2 to 5,000 students walking 2 by 2, singing songs of black kids and a few whites, and that got the town's attention that we meant business. And it was a wonderful experience because we had a lot of involvement, and it was truly grassroots because everybody couldn't march, everybody couldn't sit in, but you could make sandwiches, you could make signs, you could make phone calls. There was something that everybody could do, and that's what made the movement so engaging because it wasn't like you had a hierarchy. You said whatever you could do, we accepted that, and that was good enough.
So, what did you do then? So I know you didn't make sandwiches.
Well, I was a rebel. I was one of 3 guys. My cohorts was Frank Holloway and Leon Green. Now Frank was about 6'4" football player, and I was, believe it or not, I was 5'6", 126 pounds. So I wasn't a threat to nobody. But when I was with Frank and the other guys, I gave me a little bit of respectability. But we could go into any lunch counter, the 3 of us, and we would shut the place down. And Frank was an intimidating guy because he's big and tall, and he used to love to pull his arms like this, and he'd look down at you. And he was very intimidating, but he was as meek as a lamb. But people couldn't say it by looking at him because his demeanor. Um, but we every day after chapel, that was compulsory chapel back in those days. We got our assignments and we hit the streets and every day. And it was great because our classmates got us our assignments so we wouldn't be behind. And then we would turn them to them. And even when we went to jail, the same thing. They would get our assignments, they would get them to us. We would complete the assignment, and then they would get it to our professors. Until I went in solitary confinement, there was nothing. I was completely cut off from everybody. And that was probably one of the life changing events I've ever experienced was solitary confinement. And they put me in solitary confinement because I was singing too loud. Well, the students used to sing a lot, and I guess I was a little exuberant that particular day, and that was my punishment.
So, talk to us more about your involvement. So, I know you're involved with the Congress on Racial Equality and the Freedom Rides. Talk to us about those things. How did you get involved with those specific movements and those specific organizations?
Well, when we were successful in Atlanta, the Congress on Racial Equality realized that there were students throughout the country who had been trained in nonviolence, and they wanted to tap in this pool. See, they had a freedom ride back in 1947 called the Journey of Reconciliation, but they only went to the border states and what they call the Upper South. But in 1960, the new Supreme Court decision, Boynton versus Virginia, said that not only could we ride on buses, but we could also, anything in the bus terminals we were allowed to use. And that's what we were testing. Now, this was not an act of civil disobedience. This was an act to test the compliance, the level of compliance that each state or city would offer. So that was the primary purpose. Um, it was timely because many people knew that the law had been changed, but they continued to segregate themselves. They knew that they could go in and eat, but they were still going to the colored waiting room and be served through a cubby hole. And that's the most degrading sense that here you are, you're paying full fare, and yet they were treating you like this. They treated you differently, and that just wasn't fair. And I think we saw the irony of what they were doing, and hopefully we could convince people that hey, this shouldn't be.
So, talk to us about your ride. I know you just wrote a book about your ride. So, talk to us about that.
Well, our ride began in May, and we had to go to Washington, D.C. for advanced training in nonviolence. Now, we had already had training in nonviolence, but the Congress of Racial Equality wanted to make sure that under no circumstances. Now, see, if someone confronts you frontally, it's easy to be nonviolent. But when someone comes from the side and from behind you, your normal instincts might kick in. So that was one reason they wanted to test us. And it was a harrowing experience because we had role playing and we would go at one another. But our problem was this: we thought the worst thing that could happen to us is someone might squirt ketchup on you, might pour out a soda or a milkshake on you. They might even spit on you. Or the worst we thought was they would put a cigarette out on you. So we went through this, and we were really happy and really secure that we were not going to be violent, that would be attacked. But we didn't realize the Klan had a different opinion. They wanted to go a lot further than we even imagined. We couldn't have imagined the things that we confronted later on.
So when you went on this ride with the other people, you mentioned that you were students, and that they had just let first year students in, freshman students in. What role did young people, did students play in the movement? Were there others like you?
Well, there were a lot of young people throughout the country, and they were involved. And I think, change begins with young people. Young people get impatient. They're not going to wait forever. We knew that our parents and grandparents and others had tried things, and they gained some modest gains, but nowhere near where we felt they should be. Plus, being at a place like Morehouse, you had kids from the north, from the west, and they would talk about life, and we'd say these are things we had never experienced. So, that we were eager to learn. And I think that was another thing that really sparked us on, is that kids would talk about freedom. We used to say, well, we'd like to have someone, black people work in downtown Atlanta, or to be able to travel from city to city without being harassed. I mean, we acted out all these things that we thought could be. And I think that was the impetus. And people say, well, why did you do it? Well, in a lot of cases, we didn't have anything to lose. I mean, things were already bad. And, here you are looking to graduate from college, and you don't want to go back in the same old mold that your parents and your grandparents had gone through. So we wanted something better. And I think we weren't sure that we were going to make a change, but we had to do something. We weren't deluding ourselves to think we're going to go out here and do this and that. No, yeah, that was not nowhere near our mindset. But we felt that we had to do something, and it was worth the risk.
What did your parents say?
Well, let me say, I didn't quite tell them the whole truth. I told them I was going to DC for advanced training in nonviolence, and I left it there. Because I don't know, my mom, I had never left the state of Georgia before the Freedom Rides. And, mothers want to know what you're eating, where you're sleeping, and all those kind of things, the brotherly things. But the men in the family convinced her tentatively to let me go. Because, well, like I said, I had been arrested. I had been involved in the Atlanta movement. So it was, but the Freedom Rides was the difference. And her attitude changed tremendously after May 14th.
So I guess she figured out that you had not been completely honest with her. So what did you do after the Freedom Rides? Were you still involved with the Congress? Are you still involved with the Congress on Racial Equality?
Well, they've changed. The Congress on Racial Equality has changed a lot, but I still keep in contact with them. But here's what happened after um, the Freedom Rides, and after we no longer could continue. I was subpoenaed to testify against the men that were photographing that picture of Birmingham. And when that picture was taken, they were startled and they let me go. I just walked away. But the photographer, they beat him up. They destroyed his camera. And they thought they had destroyed all the images, but one image survived. So the FBI identified them all. I was subpoenaed and I went there, Montgomery, for their trial. So we go through the shenanigans of a trial for 2 weeks, and they're all exonerated. So I come back home and I talk to my mom and told her that I was a little disappointed that they didn't get convicted. But mom knew that I would stay in the movement, and she was afraid I'd be killed. So mom says that why don't you join the army? It would be safer. So my mother felt it would be safer for me in the military than to stay in the civil rights movement. So because I hadn't been truthful to her before, and because the trauma of what happened to us impacted her, so I figured I owe that much to her. So rather than joining the army, I joined the Marine Corps because at the time the Marine Corps had very few. At the time when I joined, they had no general officers and a few senior enlisted. So I figured, well, hey, I'll go there and I'll get a commission, and maybe I can do something, change my. So that's why I ended up in the Marine Corps, and why I decided, because mom thought it was safer for me in the army.
Huh. Interesting. I have a question, but so you joined the Marine Corps, you served in the Marines, then you got out. Um, is When you got out, was it different than when you went in? Like you went through all the trials and the tribulations, struggling and the fight before the Freedom Ride, after the Freedom Ride, you went and fought for the country, and you came back.
Well, one of the most difficult periods for me was after Vietnam. I was happy to be alive. I was happy to be home, and I had to celebrate. Some friends and I went out to eat in a restaurant, and I was denied a hamburger. Now, this is in 1966, and I think that was the hardest thing to deal with, because I think I left a lot of me in Vietnam, and I didn't realize how much I had left there until 10 years later, when the effects of Agent Orange, which a defoliant they used in Vietnam to kill vegetation, well, also we brought a lot of that back for us. It lays dormant in your body, and ironically, people who have been uh, affected by this have multiple illnesses. In multiple cancers. And my brother died from it, and my cousin died from it, and they came to Vietnam after I did. We were in the second group of Marines to go into Vietnam. It's given me a new perspective on life, because as a disabled person, you rely on others to do for you things that you would normally do for yourself. So you have to be caregiving is a hell of a job, and in most places, caregivers never get the credit they're due, because they put up with us at our worst and also at our best. But it's also, I just hope that those of you who have people who have gone, not only in Vietnam, because you will find that the Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans you're going to have to deal with for the next 15 years. They're going to be your problem. And you're going to find that they too have some difficulties that we don't understand right now, that we're going to have to be confronted with in the future. So sometimes they say that if you want to see the price of freedom, go to your VA hospital, and you get a chance to see what freedom looks like.
It's interesting you mentioned the price of freedom, and I think about what we have gone through these last couple of years. What are the things that you think about when you see? I can imagine it's a lot, but what do you think about, and where do you see us going?
Well, sometimes it's hard to be a black man in America. Sometimes because you're just misunderstood. Sometimes because you do stupid things. But it doesn't matter why. The thing is, it is. When George Floyd was murdered, I was so upset. I called Pete Conroy, who's the chairman of the Freedom Riders National Park in Anniston. I said, we know how to do demonstrations. We know how to do it peacefully, and we know how to do it nonviolently. We got to do something. So out of that conversation, we have developed what's called the Freedom Riders Training Institute. And we have developed a curriculum where we train police officers, we train first responders, we train educators, and also we train demonstrators how to do this how they can exercise their First Amendment rights and do it nonviolently and not let someone hijack your movement. Because those groups, believe it or not, they were nonviolent. But the thing is, what they failed to do is they never articulated who they are. You have to define who you are and what your mission is. When you're marching, people need to know why you're in the street. You need to let them know because then they can either support you or not support you. But I think so. It's a matter of messaging, and I think now, uh, you know, since 9/11, we are not the same people. We are afraid and we are skeptical. And I think until we can regain faith in each other, I mean, really, nowadays, when you make a statement, they figure you got a double meaning. That's a false statement. That's fake news. I mean, we have gone to the point where we even question our mothers and fathers. We don't have any faith in anything. It used to be mom and apple pie. Not anymore. You figure she bought it at the bakery. She didn't make that pie.
So I hear that, right? But I also see sometimes there's situations that don't deserve that faith, right? And so how do we approach life when we know that things are not everything's always on the up and up. Like some things are actually shady. And we feel it, we see it, but like I think you were able to engage um and and protest, non-violently, knowing that things may not have been okay, but you were able to still have some faith. So how did you keep that faith in the face of like, I don't know if I would actually, I know I wouldn't have the wherewithal to be able to do it. Like I'd have hit somebody. It'd have been not pretty. Because I know that. But how did you get that?
Well, I tell you one thing you must remember: no matter how difficult things look, there are a lot of good people in this world. A lot of good people. Sometimes we're jaded by the few bad apples, as they say. But I have found, no matter where I've gone in this world, that there are good people. Like in the Freedom Rides, even though there was a green book that told us where we could uh, sleep and stay and eat, we depended on people in the communities. We had mass meetings every evening, and at the end of the mass meeting, they would let us, we would stay with the very members of the congregation. Also, they took out, black folks understand this, they used to take out love offerings. And that's how our trip was financed by these people. We stayed with them, they fed us, they financed us, and they gave us the best that they had. And many of them didn't have very much, but they gave us the best that they had. And if it had not been for the people in all these various towns, in these communities, we could never have made it. But they are the ones, those are the heroes. And if you one thing you find in my book, there are names you probably never heard before, and you may never hear them again. But I wanted to highlight the people that impacted my life and the other freedom riders. Uh, it's just amazing how wonderful these people were. We come into their town sometimes, and when we left, they called help just because we were there and because they helped us. But that was the price of freedom, and that's how our movements work. But the thing is, I think we made lifelong friends. Wherever we go, whenever there's a reunion or something, people come out of nowhere and say, "My grandmother and their auntie," and you know how people talk, so they relate to us in some way or another. So that's what good thing about it. But there are good people in this world, and we must realize that there are good people.
Hmm. So how do we find the good people? I remember like there's I can't remember. I think I may have heard of like Mr. Rogers or something, and they were like, when you're in trouble, find the helpers. So how do you find the helpers, especially at a time like now?
Well, I can sum it up, and I thought I was the originator of this phrase, but apparently I wasn't. And I don't know, maybe it's just in the cosmos. And I heard it last week on a TV show, but I have been saying, be a friend and make a friend. And I think if we have that attitude of reaching out to others and open ourselves up, not only to criticism, but also to affection, because when you get to know people, you say, oh, hey, I could like that person. You know, one of the things that we used to do as freedom riders, because that was the first time we had large scale blacks and whites working together, we began to share music. We began to share the books that we were reading and also recipes. And that in itself brought us together because you realized what you didn't like and what you did like. Also, it opened up a whole new world of literature because, like, for example, I was reading James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni and authors like that, while my white colleagues were reading Kafka and Nietzsche and Camus. And, these have become my heroes today. So but it's a beginning of how we learn and how we share. And that's why I think as we know more and more about each other, you realize that, hey, I can like her. I can like him. But the thing is that because we don't know, that's where the prejudice come into play. That's where hatred come into play because you don't know each other. And you assume that a person is such and such, and that's not the case in many cases.
Hmm. I like a little Nietzsche, just a little bit, not too much. Sometimes a little heavy. So one of the things I hear you talking about is you use the word "we" a lot, um, and it makes me think of community. So when you're thinking about, how you relate to the world, what role does community play in that?
Community is very important because we all live in community. We all want our communities uh, to be peaceful. And if we ever sell that house, we want to get maximum amount of money for that house. But the thing is, in community, whether you're there to borrow a cup of sugar or just a chat across the fence, uh, we reach out to one another. And the thing is, one thing about in America, if you like something, you migrate towards that. And the more you extend your surroundings, the more you reach out and increase your uh, level of influence. You realize that, hey, you go to bed at night and you're happy because it's peaceful. You're not worried about somebody breaking your house or breaking in your car. You're at peace. Community is essential because basically we are all just a bunch of little small communities interconnected, and you can call it a city, you can call it a state, but that's what we are.
And I think I want to continue with this community things. I think this is a really interesting point. I know in the Northwest Arkansas, we're really big about community. We talk about how we get along with each other, how we interrelate with the rest of the state. What are some lessons that we could learn about community that could help us stretch our community and make it even stronger? What are things that you've learned in your life?
I think when you realize that when you work together, you can achieve much. Uh, any successful campaign requires you to have allies. You have to reach out. But the thing is, the only way you're going to develop allies is first you define who you are and you define what you're about. And I think a lot of the movements today, that's not happening. You see kids in the street, you don't know why they're there. And I tell them, you got to let the people know why you're marching so they will either like you or dislike you. But it's imperative that if you're a leader of a nonviolent First Amendment movement, you need to tell people who you are and why you're there. And also, you don't want to march forever. The idea is the idea of a demonstration is get people's attention. Okay, once you get their attention, then you want to negotiate. That's where you got to move it from the streets into the boardrooms and executive suites of the mayor's and governor's office. And once you do that, then you got to be prepared to negotiate to solve the problem. You're about solving problems, but you've got to be able to articulate the problem and you got to be able to explain it to the people in the community so they can help you and provide the necessary bodies and also resources because it's not cheap, And then nowadays, you have to take extra precautions to make sure that your movement isn't hijacked. And I've talked with groups and I've given them input as to how to prevent your movement from being hijacked. Because it happened to Dr. King. His last movement was hijacked in Memphis before he was killed. And since then, people have found a way to infiltrate your movement and they have a different agenda than the people who started the marches are. So I work with them and try to explain to them how you can prevent that from happening. Because we don't need people to be burning up houses and burning cars because that's where you mess up the community. That's your community that they're burning up, and that's why it's important as a member of the community to work for its betterment.
Thank you. So that's my cue. Um, so I guess last thing, we have a lot of young people today who are scared. They're worried about opportunities, worried about where this country is going. They're seeing it going in a lot of different directions. So I think they're seeing some of the same things that you saw when you were younger. So just a couple weeks ago. What do you tell them? What lesson? Well, what message do you have for the young people so that we can keep them motivated, keep them connected, and keep them willing to make some of the sacrifices to strengthen our communities and move us forward.
Well, like I said earlier, change begins with young people. Uh, and I tell them, you can change the world. And I says, a movement starts with one person. And you find people of like mind, you brainstorm, you get together, and you realize that there are things that you can do. There are things that you can make. You can just take small steps. But the thing is back to what you said before. It's all about community. This is our neighborhood. What can we do? Working together to make it a better place. Then stretch it a little further. This is our country. How can we make it better? And I think, one of the things, I'm going to say this, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Most people don't understand taxes. Nobody wants to pay taxes, but they want the government to do certain things. But I look at it, and people always talk about the rich. I said, what you have to look at in our society is how many people don't pay taxes. If you're disabled, in many cases, you don't pay taxes. If you're homeless, you don't pay taxes. If you're chronically unemployed, you don't pay taxes. There's a list of about 20 different groups in our society who pay no taxes or little taxes. So it falls on you hard-working people in the middle class. We're supporting everybody else because we're the ones paying taxes. And it hurts. And I say that because when I came back from Vietnam, while there in country, it was tax free. But then when I came back to the States, I got a tax bill. Now, I wasn't making very much money in 1965, believe me. But I got a $600 tax bill, and for me at that particular time, it was almost devastating. But then again, like I say, I understand why it's taxed, and we want everybody else to pay for the things that we like the government to do, and that's not fair. But I think that if we, as a society, we as a country, when we start realizing that, hey, I got to give a little to get a little, and I think that we'll all be a lot happier. But we always look at the other guy. We talk about what he doesn't do or she doesn't do. But are you doing your part? So
I had a conversation with one of my friend's husbands, and we talked about that. So, thank you. I think that's a big lesson. Like not worrying so much about what other people are doing, but making sure we're doing our part, and doing what we can. And sometimes it may be more than what someone else is doing because we have more ability. So thank you for that. I think we're about to the end of our conversation piece. Um, was there any last words that you wanted to share with our audience before we move into our question and answer section?
one thing that bothers me, and I didn't realize how bad it was until we came back from Orlando visiting my grandkids, and we were invited to this program in downtown Atlanta, and GPS took us on a different route, and I saw that there were homeless people around the state capitol. Now here you got lawmakers making laws that's supposed to make life better for everybody, and they're surrounded by a homeless encampment. I'm saying, how can you come to work every day to see these people with their tents and stuff laying in the streets in downtown Atlanta? So what I want to do, and I don't know how bad the problem is here, but we have got to do something, and I think this is where the church may have failed us, is that we have allowed homelessness to exist. Homelessness and poverty is not the new American dream. So how and why do we let it happen? Here you have one of the richest countries in the world, and we got people living out on our bridges and in our parks. To me, it makes no sense. Maybe I'm wrong. If I am, correct me. But how can we do this? How can we allow this to happen? And it grows and grows and grows. But the funny thing is, these homeless people have these expensive tents to live in, and I can't figure that out either. You know, but what I'm saying, it's a problem. It's something that we need to correct. You know, as if for my Christian spirit tells me, what it is, clothe the hungry, clothe the naked, and feed the hungry, and we're not doing it. And now we're cold with the snow and ice. We'll have heating centers and let them stay for a day or two. But these people live on the streets 365 days a year, and God knows we need to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that was one of the last marches and the last campaigns that Dr. King was working on was the Poor People's Campaign to address issues of hunger and poverty and homelessness. So I guess we still got some more work to do.
Yes, we do.
So I have a couple questions here for you. And someone wants to ask about your experiences, more deeply about your experiences in the military. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? What was that like as a black man? I know I watched a lot of movies, Red Tails, love them. But what was that like for you?
Well, the Marine Corps and the military life uh, was a very good experience. And I think a young man, a young woman who is not sure about education, because you can also get an education by going through there, is much better than when I had gone, because I had anticipated uh, getting back in college through the military, but I didn't realize that the Marine Corps or none of the military service was going to assist me in breaking down barriers. And that was the biggest initially why I was in commission when I first went in. It took me 10 years to get a commission, but things had changed tremendously by then. But I think that for me, like in Vietnam, I had two jobs. One of my jobs saved a lot of lives, and the other one enabled our people to take lives. Um, so it was kind of a balance. But the main thing is that I learned a greater respect for life, also appreciation for comradeship, because there, even though there were kids in Vietnam who had their Confederate flags, we all got along together, because when your life depends on each other, you forget about some of these other things that we believe in. I was in a group that was all volunteer. We were there because we wanted to be there, um, and it was a life changing experience, because I made friends, lifelong friends, and some of them are also suffering from Agent Orange. I talked to a friend about 2 weeks after Christmas, and he has been diagnosed with ALS, and so some of the things that we experience in war tends to linger, and they last. Some of the wounds last for a long time, and we realize we talk about the cost of doing things, and there's a cost in life. When you get involved in things, sometimes you have to pay the piper. And sometimes we don't survive. Sometimes we die. But we also learn to love.
So, how do you respond to those that advocate violence as an important part of making necessary changes, especially as they see limited change over decades of work?
Well, I'll answer this way. Gandhi proved that nonviolence worked. Dr. King proved that it worked. And I know that when you escalate, when you retaliate um, violence with violence, people die. There are other movements like, look what happened to the Black Panthers. The Panthers had a lot of good programs, but when they took them arms, they gave them an excuse to be wiped out. There was a MOVE organization out of Philadelphia, I think, when they were exterminated. Um, and yeah, so violence never works. In the end, it never works. Uh, because then you have an insurrection. Speaking of insurrection, yeah, we.
So this one, I have another question after you. It's kind of historical, right? So thinking back to your youth and Bull Connor and his loveliness. So do you think that the brutality that he inflicted upon people and that being broadcast um, helped to end the segregation era? Do you think that because everyone had to watch so much violence happen on TV, we couldn't escape it?
I don't know if well, there is a lot of violence on TV, but I think a lot of the problem stems from just not knowing. When it's easy to demonize someone when you don't know them. When there are myths that says that they're this or they don't have the same religion or they don't have the right religion. When you find things to pick on, and also one of the biggest problems in America is that people don't believe that you can have a conversation about race without animosity, without bitterness. You can talk about race. Yeah, some things will make you upset, but that doesn't mean you can't discuss them. And I think once we learn that we can sit down and have this conversation without getting upset and fussing at one another and calling each other names, then we're going to come to a position where we realize that, hey, there are some things, hey, we're not going to do those things again. For example, one of the biggest problems that we've had in this country is education. We have been denied education at all levels. I mean, there have been some places where they've closed down schools, they've closed down the whole districts and whole states rather than to teach black kids. Now, to me, it seems that if you have an educated populace, then that's a good thing. You say that this person is dumb, but yet you want to allow him or her to get an education. That doesn't make any kind of sense to me.
Thank you. Um, mm, all the questions are coming in, so I'm trying to read them. Um, in the face of so much violence and hate, how did you find the strength to respond with such dignity? That's a good one.
Well, I grew up in a black community in the black church. And one thing about the South, in the black church, that was the only sanctuary we had. Nobody bothered us at church. And a typical Sunday for black people in the 60s, the 50s, and 60s was this. You had Sunday school, then you had church, then you had maybe something like Bible training in the afternoon, and then you had in the evening service. So you had a whole day of worship. And even not as like me, we learned a little something. You know, during the freedom rides and the sitting movements, we learned to pray. We sang a lot of the old Negro hymns and Negro spirituals. But I tell people about praying. I says, most of us were not ministerial students, and our prayers were very simplistic. Lord, take care of me. Lord, help me. Lord, let me not be afraid. Nothing really exorbitant, but that was our crying out to the Almighty for His guidance. So, I think also that kept us grounded and made it easier for us to be nonviolent because it was based in the church.
I remember going to church with my grandmother, and it was an all-day affair. And you were lucky if you could get a snack. I enjoy all purse candy. That's what we ate a lot of. Um, so you mentioned movements need to articulate what they're saying and why they're protesting. Why do you think people aren't being clear about what they want? And I would ask, why is it that we're not able to hear what people are articulating? I think there's two things there.
Well, I'll tell you what they tell me. The Black Lives Matter in several places. I worked with the ones in Birmingham, Alabama. I worked with some of the people in Oregon and also in North Carolina. And what you have is they try to lead by committee. And I says, why do you rotate leadership? They said because in the past the leaders were killed. So in other words, you would be the leader today, you tomorrow, and you the next day. In this way, the bad guys can't determine who's in charge. So hopefully nobody will be killed. So that's the dilemma they have. But I says you still must remember that when you're dealing with the issue that we're talking about, it's dangerous, and people will be killed or be hurt, and that's the price or the cost of being involved. I don't know if they will change. Also, when we first in Atlanta, when we first hit the streets, we published a manifesto which outlined all the grievances, all the things that we were upset about, and all the things we want to change. So the whole community knew what we were about and why we were out there. And I think that's the easy, simplest thing you can do. Let people know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Thank you. This is a cute one. I'm going to ask this one. They took a really pretty picture, Charles and his wife today in front of the love statue. It was really adorable. So can you tell us how you met your lovely wife? Because y'all are a beautiful couple.
Well, I'm gonna tell you my version. After I left, I stayed in Cuba for 4 years after I retired, and I finally came back to Atlanta, and I worked for a little electronic company in Southwest Atlanta. And my future wife was the best friend of the boss's wife, and I worked in the back his electronic shop, and they had a one-way mirror, and I could see out, and she couldn't see me. And I would watch her when she'd come in, and they would be so animated. They would, girl talk, and that just started something. And I think we were dating for about a month, and realized that we needed to get married. And there was no reason to get married. I mean, there was nothing working that kind of thing. It was just that we just loved. We just wanted to be together because we would have conversations over coffee and tea. I'd drink coffee, she'd have tea, and we would talk for hours about anything and everything. And she was just fun to be with, So when you have someone like that, you don't let them get away. So.
Aww. Thank you. We'll get your version at dinner to make sure that knows that. So we got time for a couple more questions. But with this being a predominantly white region, how do we steward more DEI initiatives?
Let's say that again.
So with us in Northwest Arkansas, this is a predominantly white region. So how do we steward more DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives?
Well, I think that as we get to know each other, we can learn to love each other. Plain and simple. I think that once you realize when we have true conversations and you talk about the things that you like, the things that influence your life, it will impact others. And you'll find out that we're so much more alike than we are different. Yeah. In our hearts, and that's the best place. Sometimes it's we don't realize that, hey, I can like that person. Hey, you do things you like. Well, hey, I didn't know you could do that. Yes, I can do lots of things. You never asked.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So, how do you think social media has affected people's ability or perceptions of their ability to kind of come together for civil rights? Because it's different talking to someone face to face versus a tweet or a TikTok or a Facebook.
Well, I think it's the greatest thing going, and if young people have maximized it, I think that I've been impressed with the numbers they're able to turn out because they could tweet or they could post on Facebook and tell you, I want you to see you in downtown square with X hour, and people will get out. So it's a good way to get the word out. I just think that they need to be able to screen their people a lot better. But I'm impressed with the diversity that they're able to turn out, and I'm impressed with the numbers. We never, I mean, rarely do we get those kind of numbers. I think, that, like I said earlier, the largest march that I was ever involved in was about 5,000. But these kids, I mean, they have turned out some remarkable numbers. Uh, and I said they just have not found a way yet to control it. But that's like the Freedom Riders Training Institute. That's it will enable them to do these marches, do these demonstrations, and do it nonviolently and peacefully.
Mm. Look at that. I think this Freedom Riders Training Institute sounds like it's a perfect melding of, our current tactics with our older tactics so that we can be able to best address our issues today. So I'm gonna look it up because
Okay.
I want to go.
There's a nice website, and we had our first 40 kids who were arrested during the George Floyd incident, and they were arrested in Alabama. And they, after they took the 1 hour or 2 hour course, they were exonerated. They got a certificate, and the courts more or less cleared, their cases, so they no longer have any criminal record for protesting.
That's good. So this is our last question. One of the things I've noticed as I've talked to you is that you're very calm and like just at ease with everything that you've experienced, and you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot. How do you do that? How specifically, what role has forgiveness played in your life and in your coming to terms with everything?
Well, I had a praying grandmother and a praying mother, and the religion it has an impact on it, even though at times they may think you're a knothead and you're not really soaking it in. We are listening, and I your kids are listening too. You don't give up on them, but I just think that you have to have a moral background. You have to have faith and believe in something that's greater than you. Um, I don't know. I guess my wife and I, from day one, we've been on that accord. And I think that's important in any relationship, regardless if it's a denominational type of thing, but you've got to believe that there's something bigger and better than you are, greater than we are, and how you address that in your lives. I think it makes you grounded. I think it makes you willing to work with others. I think makes you optimistic. You know, uh, sometimes it's hard to be optimistic nowadays. But you gotta, like to we tell our kids, hold your head up, stick your chest out, walk proud, tall. You know, uh, simple things. I mean, there's nothing really magical about that. But also, we got to talk to one another, not at each other. Talk with each other. Just a nice conversation over a cup of coffee or an adult beverage, as you're so inclined. But I mean, we need to have some more honest conversations, and I think when we do that, our community, as your word, will come closer and closer, and better and better.
Well, that is, thank you. I think that was our last question. I want to thank you for coming here today and sharing this information. I think it's, for me personally, I know it's helpful to hear these things because sometimes watching everything on TV, I watch way too much news, have to cut down. It gets to you, right? But like seeing you and hearing you and the optimism and the forgiveness that you have and that you demonstrate, like it lets me know that like it's gonna be okay. And that I can also learn to do some of those things too. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having me.